In this week's edition of the Iron Will Report, the federal government caves to Google, the tyrannical Dutch government collapses, charges against Derek Sloan and Randy Hillier have been dropped, the mainstream media slander campaign against the sound of freedom, and a surgeon confesses that reassignment surgery on children, quote, poses issues of consent. Those and 11 more stories that mainstream media won't report and our government doesn't want you to hear. Last week, I reported on Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez's order to pull all federal ads from Meta, the parent company for Facebook and Instagram, in the wake of Meta's pushback against funding mainstream media propaganda in Canada under Bill C-18. At the time, Rodriguez said he was not leveling such sanctions against Google, who have also vowed to drop all Canadian mainstream media content in the wake of C-18, stating that we are deeply convinced that Google's concerns will be resolved through regulations. It appears that regulations is doublespeak for furious backpedaling. Earlier this week, the Canadian Heritage Department said they were moving away from mandatory payments towards a, quote, contributions model for online news. Trudeau's remarks last week condemning Google's censorship as an attack on Canadians seem to contradict the recent amendment. Under Bill C-18, the CRTC can now determine which news content can be viewed online in Canada. According to the bill, to be considered eligible for sharing, a news outlet must be a qualified Canadian journalism organization and produce news content of public interest that is primarily focused on matters of general interest and reports of current events. And determining what is in the public interest is, of course, under the discretion of the government. At this point, most of us are completely mystified how someone as crooked and incompetent as Turd is not only walking around a free man, but still posing as our Prime Minister. The man can't even competently flip a pancake. Here he is, July 8th, at the Calgary Stampede.
Golden brown. Here we go.
After the Dutch PM's government collapsed last Friday due to disagreements with coalition parties over how many asylum seekers their country should take in per year, WEF young global leader Mark Rutte announced he would retire from politics. Overcrowded migration centers have plagued the country, and Rutte's coalition parties were unable to find a solution. In the Netherlands, about 43,000 refugees are accepted each year. More conservative parties, such as Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom, oppose the number of migrants the Netherlands takes in and want to significantly curb migration numbers. Taking a page from fellow WEF comrade Justin Trudeau, Rutte called the nationwide farmer protests against his climate policies small and unacceptable. Last year, over 40,000 Dutch farmers protested outside government buildings and official residences to voice their grievances. Earlier this year, Dutch regional elections saw the recently formed Farmer Citizen Movement take large numbers of seats, making it currently the largest party in the Dutch Senate. Carolyn van der Plas, an agricultural journalist who founded the party in 2019, has attracted voters from the left, right, and center. In March 2023, NL Times reported that the party celebrates Dutch farming and citizenship as a family-centered, small community model. Her supporters are busy putting up banners and flags as she announces the campaign has begun. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms announced this week that charges against Mr. Derek Sloan and Mr. Randy Hillier were dropped on Thursday, June 29th. Both men attended a rally against COVID-19 lockdown measures in April 2021. Derek Sloan is the leader of the Ontario Party, and Randy Hillier served as an MPP in Ontario from 2007 until his retirement from politics in 2022. Both are staunch supporters of Canadian rights. On April 25th, 2021, there was a No More Lockdowns protest in Stratford, which the two men attended. At the time, the Ontario government regulations stated that 0 persons were allowed to gather outdoors, which was a complete ban on the freedom of assembly. The Ontario government did this despite the fact many experts agree that spread of respiratory viruses at short-duration outdoor events are extremely limited. Mr. Sloan and Mr. Hillier each faced a maximum fine of $100,000 for attending this protest. The prosecutor agreed to drop the charges in exchange for a modest charitable donation or volunteer work. Mr. Sloan made the charitable donation, and Mr. Hillier volunteered at a food bank in Lanark County. The Ontario government's lockdowns, which effectively banned any political protesting whatsoever, were a grave threat to our freedom in Canada. Restrictions may be over for now, but there was no indication how long they would last at the time. 2 weeks became 2 months, which became almost 2 years of failed COVID policies, says Mr. Sloan. I am proud to have stood against this tyranny with many other brave Canadians. The Stratford prosecutor made the right choice, and it is now up to other prosecutors in other districts to drop these meaningless charges. One day, history and the courts will concur that these lockdowns were unwarranted and a serious and unnecessary interference with Canadians' basic freedoms. However, their fight is not over. Both Mr. Sloan and Mr. Hillier have further charges outstanding against them. Mr. Hillier has launched a charter challenge against the lockdowns that banned all outdoor protests and will argue that they were an unjustifiable infringement of his rights. The hearing is set for the 27th and 28th of this month. You can donate to the Justice Centre's efforts to defend our rights at jccf.ca. The movie Sound of Freedom has already earned more than $40 million in ticket sales, nearly 3 times its production cost, and is expected to finish out this weekend in 3rd place, despite relentless, desperate attempts by mainstream media to discredit the film. Sound of Freedom is based on the true story of Tim Ballard, a former government agent who quit his job to rescue a little girl from sex traffickers in the Colombian jungle. Tim saved 123 people, 55 of them children, in one mission. In the years since, Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad have saved thousands of children. Ticket sales have soared since its opening on July 4th. Over 4 million advance tickets were sold online on Monday as moviegoers became aware of the depraved multi-billion-dollar child sex trafficking industry, of which the United States is the largest consumer. In what appears to be a panicked reaction to the film's success, mainstream media outlets CNN, The Guardian, and The Washington Post have attempted to smear it, with suggestions that it is affiliated with QAnon. Not to be outdone, CBC radio pop culture columnist Rad Simonpillai called it a dog whistle for xenophobic, pro-Trump, pro-life types.
As we said, none of us heard of this movie, and you would have only heard of this movie if you are a regular among church groups, or you regularly watch Fox News, or you follow right-wing personalities like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and the like, or you are a QAnon conspiracy theorist, or part of the so-called freedom movements.
CinemaScore gave Sound of Freedom an A+, and Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 76 out of 99 audience rating, beating Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that a series of sections from the Department of Justice website that deal with domestic and international child sex trafficking were quietly taken down this past week, including a section describing how U.S. minors are recruited and exploited in the commercial sex trade. In a statement on July 11th, Representative Anna Paulina Luna linked the DOJ's move to a New York Times report suggesting the Department of Health and Human Services lost contact with thousands of unaccompanied alien children who have been caught up in child smuggling and child labor operations. Blair Peters, a Canadian-trained surgeon, says he is performing irreversible sex surgeries on prepubescent children who have not experienced sexual feelings and are unable to give informed consent, as they have no understanding of what the repercussions will be.
It's challenging because there's this question of how does that factor into consent when you're consenting someone for pubertal suppression, and there likely is some effect on downstage genital surgery, but you don't know if an individual is going to desire genital surgery in the future or not.
According to Blair, who describes himself as a queer surgeon, little is known about the long-term consequences of experimental surgery on children. As well as the transgender industry and insurance companies that cover lawsuits, the frank admissions pose a problem for governments around the world who are pushing the trans agenda as affirming. In this case, affirming clearly means brainwashing. Normally, I would have my own comment on this, but I can't add anything to the very succinct statement made by lawyer Dan Minucci. In any sane society, this video would be used as evidence in Blair Peters' trial for crimes against humanity. Coming up this week is my two-part interview with John Hillier, a clinical psychologist with 30 years of experience working with sex offenders and troubled youth. John is also the founder of UnmaskingTheTransMovement.com. In these interviews, John reveals the psychology of the people behind the transgender movement and the fact that here in Canada, surgeries have exploded since the medical community received permission to bill the government for these mutilations of children. That is all for this week's free version of the Ironwood Report. If you want to help us spread the truth, please subscribe to our channel, then like and share this video. Social media algorithms promote content based upon how many followers, likes, and shares they get. So please take just a few moments to do that and help us share the truth with others. You can get a full access 15-day trial at ironwoodreport.com without providing your credit card information. It only takes a minute and you will be granted instant access. In this week's members version of the Ironwood Report, a group of U.S. cattle ranchers commit to raising clean beef free of mRNA injections. Chinese-style facial recognition is now entering the U.S. The BC government is trying to sell MAiD to healthy seniors. The German health minister applies COVID logic to deaths from global warming. An Australian woman whose health is failing continues to place her faith in the vaccines. Dr. Peter McCullough is censored by The Lancet again. Canada is projected to pay out $75 million for vaccine injuries. Trudeau's government is handing over $350 million of our tax dollars for vaccines he didn't buy. Anthony Fauci may have to return his salary. Statistics show our anti-narrative misinformation campaigns are working, and Sudbury Pride cancels their own parade. This week, we release my recent two-part interview with John Hillier, psychotherapist and founder of UnmaskingTheTransgenderMovement.com. On Sunday, in Part 1, John explains the psychology of the deviants, in this case a clinical term, who are behind the transgender movement and why they want to harm our children. Then on Wednesday, in Part 2, Mr. Hillier shows the various organizations, including healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry, who are profiting from maiming our children, and how those profits are continuing to drive the agenda.